This is Up Close and Personal, Friends of Crimea from around the world. My guest tonight is a good friend. We met last week in Yerevan, Armenia. She's Natalya Saghiyan. Natalya, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for inviting me again.
Well, previously we talked more about politics, but tonight I want to focus on Armenian Friends of Crimea, and you are one of them. So I would like to introduce you and your background to the many Friends of Crimea around the world and in my Friends of Crimea Club USA. They will all get this. So first of all, tell me a little bit about your background. Growing up in Armenia, was it Yerevan, your education, and your family life, etc. So let's start with that.
Okay, I was born in Yerevan, which was in the Soviet Union at that time. So I'd say that I grew up in the Soviet Union. I went to school there, but I graduated school already. I finished school already in independent Armenia. So I'm kind of a carrier of both cultures, of the Soviet Armenia and of independent Armenia. Back then, at the time when the Soviet Union collapsed, honestly, we in our family, we didn't know how to react because we were used to live in a country where you could plan your life for decades ahead and worry about nothing because there was free education, free medicine, no unemployment, and the only thing that we didn't have is probably the freedom of speech as we see it now, in a very, very liberal sense of it. Of course, there was censorship. Of course, there was the 1937 events and Stalin and other things, but there were also many good things about it because people were more motivated to be useful and to do something to their motherland. Because this motivation, it was given to you from the kindergarten. Some people say it was Soviet propaganda, probably, yes. But what we have now, everything now is about propaganda. And after the Soviet Union collapsed, all schools in Armenia suddenly became Armenian in terms of the teaching and school books and everything was only in Armenian, which was a little problem to me because I was raised by a Russian grandmother. My mother's mom was Russian, and she married an Armenian man who was a genocide escaper. And she had a great respect towards Armenian culture and Armenian language. Being a Russian woman, she learned Armenian alphabet and she was reading and writing and speaking Armenian. So partially, she also gave me this the feeling that even though I come from a Russian-speaking family, but my native tongue is Armenian and my native culture is Armenian. And I went to university here in Yerevan, graduated from the Yerevan State University, Department of Psychology, but I never worked as a psychologist because it was not a popular profession and you couldn't make a living with that. I got involved into volunteering. I worked for an organization which is called Headquarters of Student Brigades in an old Soviet way, because it was an old Soviet organization which was rearranged into an NGO after the collapse of the Soviet Union. This is how I had a chance to visit many European countries. When I participated in different voluntary work camps and also conferences and seminars and study sessions, also at the youth centers of the Council of Europe in Budapest and Strasbourg. After that, I worked in several organizations. One of them was Women's Rights Center, which is financed to a great scale by the Open Society Institute. This is why I know how the system works from inside. And all these organizations sponsored by the Soros Foundation, as we know it, they do also a good job. They do some very useful projects, but their final goal is not that. After I finished my project at Women's Rights Center, I worked as in a totally different field. I worked as an assistant to chief technical officer at an internet service provider organization. This is what I did. After that, I got married, I got 2 children, and I was staying at home, taking care of my children until 2019. In fact, if it wasn't for the coup d'etat that happened in Armenia in 2018, I probably wouldn't join this party, and I probably wouldn't be so active in politics. I joined this party as an analyst in the beginning. But then I realized that my intellect and my education and my abilities can serve to my country. It's not about, being a populist politician now, but I really understood that the tragedy that we're in after this coup d'etat, really each and every one of us has to do everything possible to stop this, because we all saw the war coming, the war of 2020, but it was a plan. We realize now, and we understood then, that was the plan, to arrange a war around Artsakh and surrender territories. This is how I ended up in this political party, which I'm very happy about, because I discovered certain capacities that I didn't know about before, that I can, talk to people, communicate to people in a way to make them understand why do we want our country to go this way and not the other way. For example, since we're talking within the framework of the Friends of Crimea now, it is very important to understand that people in Armenia, even though they are historically pro-Russian in their majority, but very few know what actually happened in 2014, what happened before that, and what happened after that, and why this entire thing happened with the Crimea. People don't know how terrible regime in Ukraine treated people living in Crimea. And they don't know, many of Armenians have no idea about the referendum and about the will of the people of Crimea not to be with Ukraine anymore and to be with Russia. So this is also one of our goals. It's very important to explain to Armenians what's going on in the world. Because, for example, we live in Armenia, and we think that everyone in the world knows about Nagorno-Karabakh, knows about coup d'etat. This is what usually people think. But the reality is totally different. So this is one of our missions, to make people understand things about Russia, about Crimea, and about special military operations in Ukraine. Because here in Armenia, mass media, like 95% of mass media, is controlled by the West, sponsored, financed, and controlled by the West. So when people turn on their TV, out of 23 channels, 3 channels, only 2, 3. 2 of them are Russian channels broadcasted from Russia. One is the Russian state television, and one is the Fresh channel. And one is the Mir channel, which is broadcasted for the CIS country. All other TV channels are Western propaganda. Same in the internet. So this is part of our activity as a Reformist Party to raise awareness among Armenians about the reality in the world. And that what the West is feeding them is not necessarily the entire truth. It's only half of the truth, sometimes not even half of the truth. Like I said, I have two daughters. My husband, he has worked as a journalist his entire life. But during the war of 2020, the 44-day war, as we call it, he was drafted because he served in Armenian army like 25 years ago. And he was drafted on the first day of the war, 27th of September. He kept position in Martakert, it's a region of Nagorno-Karabakh, for 44 days. And even after the document of 9th of November was signed, since there was no communication, there was a complete chaos in Nagorno-Karabakh at that time. They couldn't establish communication with headquarters, but they saw that Azerbaijani army was approaching. So obviously the position they were holding was already surrendered. So they just decided to leave it and to return to the city of Martakert, hoping that it was still under Armenian control. He returned home, and after this, he just said, okay, I'm not doing any journalism politics anymore, because he was also involved with this party. But something changed. I mean, obviously, people never return home the same from the war. So he's now into sports. He's doing karate. He was doing it even before that, but now he's doing it in a professional way. This is it. During these years, I also graduated. I studied as a second higher education. I studied at Yerevan branch of St. Petersburg University of International Relations, Economics and Law. And I have a diploma of manager. But this is yet another profession that I received and never practiced. When I was staying at home with my children, I worked as a freelance translator from Russian into Armenian, English, and the other way around. So this is it probably about me.
So let me ask you about the coup d'état.
Mm-hmm.
I have to ask you: was it a color revolution? Was George Soros's Open Society, other American NGOs, NSAID, was the United States behind it?
Not only the United States, because when we say collective West, we have to understand that collective West includes many players for different tasks. For example, in coup d'etat that happened in Armenia in 2018, the British Crown was also involved, as long as interests of Turkey and Azerbaijan were represented there, which even President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, stated in one of his speeches. He loves giving speeches about how Armenians have no right to have sovereignty, no right to have army, because they are not native here. Like Armenia is not our inherent motherland, and we just came from somewhere and occupied Azeri land. This is what he loves to talk about. And every now and then he reminds that Azerbaijan and Turkey were directly involved in the coup d'etat in Armenia of 2018, which was obviously a color revolution, because the scenario was pretty much the same as it happened during the Arab Spring, in Ukraine twice actually, in Georgia. So with very little localization, it all went on by the same scenario. The US was there, represented directly through the multiple NGOs that operate in Armenia. For example, the famous Open Society Institute, the so-called Soros Foundation, is in Armenia since 1996. Many other organizations like the USAID and Eurasia Foundation and many others, they are represented in Armenia already since 1993. Because I think that all these organizations were prepared for the collapse of Soviet Union, and as soon as it happened, they started growing up like mushrooms after the rain. They were everywhere. In every ex-Soviet republic, it happened in the same manner. And of course, we didn't have Victoria Nuland in Armenia, which is, I think, is it's not fair. She went to Kiev, and as far as I know, she was in Tbilisi, but for some strange reason, this lady didn't come to Yerevan. Now, I know if we were lucky, or if this is this kind of special ignorance on her side, but probably we're lucky that she wasn't there giving out cookies, as she did in Kiev during Maidan. But we did have Mr. Bolton coming to Armenia during this coup d'etat. One of the most tragic for Armenia statements that he made was that if Armenia wants to take this road of democracy and development, she has to give up its traditional boundaries and limits, which most possibly, if I may, explain what Mr. Bolton meant, is that we have to set aside our national identity. We have to forget about our history, also history with our so-called neighbors, because at the right now, when today and yesterday and tomorrow the foreign ministers of Armenia and Azerbaijan are meeting in Washington, it's a 3-day marathon negotiating on this peace treaty between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which is being pushed forward by Washington and supported by Brussels, and it doesn't represent the interests of Armenia at all. But it very strongly represents the interests of Azerbaijan and Turkey. Because Turkey states that it will consider normalization of relationship with Armenia only after Armenia signs this peace treaty with Azerbaijan. So these preconditions from the Turkish side already make it very obvious. Because, today I was reading an article. The major countries that invest money in Turkey today are the Netherlands, United States, France, and Germany. And in Azerbaijan is Great Britain, United States, the EU as a collective investor, and all other countries after that. So when we speak about negotiations between Armenia and Azerbaijan mediated by the West or by Washington in this case, isn't it obvious that Washington is not going to be neutral, and they're not going to be, pro-Armenian? Obviously, they're going to defend their money, which is in Turkey and in Azerbaijan. And but for some strange reason, regime in Armenia now, which came to power as a result of the coup d'etat that we're talking about, forgets that Russia is our strategic ally and that Russia has natural interest in this region and is represented in Armenia, and that Russian 102nd base has saved Armenia many times after the collapse of Soviet Union from Turkish aggression. Because even in the beginning of the 90s, when there was a prime minister in Turkey, Madame Tansu Çiller, she was a very nationalist prime minister, and many times in her speeches, she also said that Turkey has a legitimate right to attack Armenia because Armenia represents a natural threat for Turkey. And only presence of Russian military base in Gyumri saved us from that. Today, Russian peacekeepers are saving Armenian population in Artsakh from ethnic cleansing. This is obvious. I mean, there's no question about that. But Armenian regime is allowing EU observers, which are not observers in reality, because they are representing gendarmerie from France, police from Germany, carabinieri from Italy, and several other EU officials which have military history. And all these people came to Armenia, and they are now located in the southeast of Armenia, which Azerbaijan calls a questionable territory, and we call it unique. And that's where the border with Iran is. This is where the road towards the border to Iran is going, along to the border with Nakhchivan, which is a part of Azerbaijan, but it's an exclave of Azerbaijan. And in the north, there is a border with Azerbaijan, which wasn't there before the war. So you see, what do EU observers, so-called, have to do in the southeast of Armenia, except for spying on Iran? Because whenever Azerbaijan is shooting from their side towards Armenian military positions, they are never there, the EU observers. And we finally found out why. Because they report on their routes where they're going to visit to Azerbaijan 1 week before. Whereas Azerbaijan refused to allow EU observers to visit their side of the border. They said, no, I don't want no observers here. You know, this is my sovereign territory. No observers are wanted here. And Armenian regime thinks that this is a way for peaceful, whatever peace treaty they're going to sign with Azerbaijan, which is not a guarantee that the war will not start again. So to this extent, the US was behind this coup d'etat. And of course, there were, like I said, the collective West is represented on different levels and by different countries. And all of them have their common interest. Because today Erdogan is saying that he wants a route from Beijing to London to go either through Turkey or through Azerbaijan. But the natural route for it to go is from China to India to Iran to Armenia to the Black Sea, and from Black Sea to ports of Russia. And today's regime in Armenia is failing its relations with Iran for 5 years, while Iran has been postponing construction of the remaining 160 kilometers of the railroad from Iran to Azerbaijan and further on to Russia, pushing it forward in Armenia, telling us, what do you need? Do you need money? I will provide money. Do you need workers or, I don't know, resources? Whatever you need, I will give it to you. Just build your part of the road, because we want to have an alternative road to the other three that already exist. One from China to Russia and further to Europe goes to the Central Asian, the stands, where the situation is also very shaky because Turkey is poking its nose there already and is represented there with Grey Wolves, which is a terrorist organization in Turkey cooperating with the Erdogan regime, and anti-Armenian, anti-Kurdish, anti-Yazidi organization, which preaches genocide of every other nation in their country that is not Turkey. Everyone else has no right to live. And now they are working in the Central Asia countries to destabilize the situation over there, which is another project of the United States to create as many shaky situations around the border of Russia as possible.
People in the United States have no idea what their country is doing or how it operates and how it is creating chaos and division in all of these former Soviet republics. We've talked about that. I've talked about it before on other shows with other people. But I'd like to know now, Natalya, what you've staged a few events to show your solidarity with Russia, with Crimea. Tell me a little bit about that. Did you do it? Were you the organizer? And explain for people who are watching this show what you intended to do with these events.
The first flash mob that we organized with this beautiful dance in front of the embassy of Russia in Yerevan, it was last spring. We wanted to show our support for the special military operation because we understand why it happened. Because we understand that Russia did not start war against Ukraine, but the NATO expanded to the east, breaking all its promises given to first to the Soviet leadership and then to Russian leadership after the falling apart of the Soviet Union. That NATO and after the breakdown of the Berlin Wall, it was given a clear promise was given to Russia that NATO will not expand to the east. But as in many other cases, NATO did not keep its promise, or the collective West broke its promises and started expanding towards the east. And Russia warned them many, many times that what you are doing, I consider is as a natural threat to my national security. So think before acting. Unfortunately, the West chose Ukraine as a battlefield between the West and Russia. I'm saying unfortunately because Ukrainians are paying the price now, the monstrous price. They're paying with lives of their people. Just because leaders in Washington decided that they want to maintain the unipolar world that was there before, and Russia refused obeying these rules that are being imposed to the rest of the world, and these rules are not fair because these rules do not guarantee rights of other states. Even though we have the structure as UN, but UN, I think it's I don't know, this structure, it's not operating effectively. And as it happened with the League of Nations, the predecessor of UN, I am seeing that this I don't know if it's, or I don't know if we can call it an organization anymore because it's not working. It's just not working because the US is trying to push forward its dictatorship even inside the UN, inside the Security Council, with political gambling and unfair attitude to countries that refuse to obey these rules, as I said, imposed by the US predominantly. There is nothing fair going on in that situation with Ukraine because this is Russia against NATO plus countries that joined this campaign against Russia. And it's a tragedy.
Yeah,
and I do understand that American people have no idea about it. And I'm thinking that sometimes when I'm following the presidential elections in the United States, I am having this impression that people do not vote directly for the president, do they? They elect a group of people who elect the president afterwards. So what is democratic about it? There's nothing democratic about it. When people have no right to have a direct vote to elect the president. And this country wants to teach us how to do democracy? Really? No.
So we agree on all of that, Natalya, of course, and that's part of what I try to do with my media. But tell me more about the flash mobs. What messages were communicated, and who was involved in the flash mobs?
We organized it. I mean, our party organized it, and I was managing this entire thing. We have very active people who are our, they might not be like on paper members of our party, but they support us. And the team who actually shot the video, it is a professional team of filmmakers. Everyone has a job somewhere doing something. But they all agreed to help us with this because they share the idea that this special military operation is Of course, it's a tragedy, as I said, of Ukrainian people, but Russia had no choice. So this flash mob, of course, it was agreed with the Russian embassy because nobody would allow us to do anything like this in front of like at the embassy's door. And of course, they welcomed it. And many people who were just passing by when we were shooting the video, there was, the crowd behind the camera. There was a crowd. People were watching, and especially people of the older generation, because the song itself is, it reminds them the old Soviet songs that they feel inspired with. And they were all asking, what is this about? What is this about? And I was surprised how these people felt. They expressed their solidarity with Russia, just people who were passing by. And this was our first very successful experience. And then we decided that, of course, the 9th of May was approaching. And we thought that this is an important day. For everyone who was born in the Soviet Union, the Victory Day is one of the most important days during the year. For us in Armenia, it is 2 times more important because the 9th of May was also, for us, it was a triple holiday because it was the day of liberation of Armenian city of Shushi, which is now occupied by Azeris in Nagorno-Karabakh. It was the day when the first Artsakh war was over, and it is the 9th of May as the Victory Day that every person born in Soviet Union is celebrating as a day of victory of Soviet Union in the Great Patriotic War. So we thought of doing another flash mob where children were dancing again, and we were giving this Georgievsk ribbon to people. The ribbon, the symbol of the victory, which is very much accustomed in Russia. And people actually took it with gratitude. The older generation knew what this ribbon was about. And those who were younger didn't know, but we explained and they welcomed this explanation. Everyone listened very carefully because, of course, people do understand that Russia is historically an ally of Armenia. And now when Russia is in a very difficult situation, if we can help in this way, this is all we can do. Because a regime in Armenia announced that they're not supporting Russia in war against Ukraine, which is very sad, of course, and very stupid. But I understand why they do it, because they are being paid from somewhere else. But we, as a party which is pro-Russian, as I told before, in terms of, because natural interests of Armenia are strongly interconnected with interests of Russia in our region. This is why we're pro-Russian, not because we want some people, we hear accusations like this very often from people who do not understand and probably do it on purpose. They say you want Armenia to become a part of Russia, as it was, 150 years ago. No, we don't want Armenia to become a part of Russia. We want Armenia to maintain its sovereignty and maintain its alliance with Russia because our natural interests and our vital interests coincide in the South Caucasus, apart from the historical background that we have with Russia. So this was our second flash mob dedicated to the 9th of May. And of course, every year we go to the monument of Mother Armenia in the Victory Park, where there is a fire burning and there is a grave of an unknown soldier, which is also, yes, it's a Soviet tradition, but it's a great thing to remember everyone who gave life against, in this war against fascism and Nazis, which is Russia doing now in Ukraine, because we do see this, rebirth of fascism and Nazism in Ukraine, which is terrible, because after 75 years after this tragedy, the Second World War, for us it was a great patriotic war. And what we see now in Ukraine again, it's horrifying. Of course, we do pay the tribute every year because it's also our history. Armenia, a Soviet Republic of Armenia, which was one of the smallest republics. And when we look at the numbers, Armenia per capita sent more soldiers to the front during the Great Patriotic War than any other republic. We had many marshals and generals and colonels of Armenian origin, especially from Nagorno-Karabakh. For example, the famous Marshal Bagramyan, he's a very famous marshal. He was born in Nagorno-Karabakh, and several other generals were born in the same village with Marshal Bagramyan. So we share this history. And this is why we go there every 9th of May. First of all, to show to the younger generation that this is the right thing to do. This is how, you have to remain human. Because what we face now is that with this influence from the West, they want us to become a consumeristic society that lives only to consume, to spend money. When an iPhone means more than liberation of Artsakh. This is what they want us to become. And this is what our party is against. This is what we're combating. We want to maintain our national identity. We want to maintain our strategic alliance and expand it with Russia, but not at the cost of sovereignty of Armenia, not at all. We are in a very good contact with the Russian embassy in Armenia. We also run this internet portal, infopress.am, which is in 2 languages, in Armenian and in Russian. We're now trying to do fundraising to open also the English version of it, because it's important. The analytical articles we are preparing, both about events in Russia and about the special military operation, about Russian-Armenian relations, about other important things happening in Armenia. For example, we at our party, we believe that Armenia has to build its relationship with Iran and with Russia, because also with Georgia, where we have a historically good relations with Georgia, where we do understand that Georgia during the last decade have been more under the influence of the West through Turkey. And it's a tragedy for Georgia. They might not see it now. The regime, the authorities in Georgia, obviously they see it now. The population doesn't see it yet, because at the coast of the Black Sea, especially in Ajaria, where Batumi and Kabuleti and many other cities, tourist cities, are located, all big businesses belong to Turkish businessmen, which is a way of economic expansion that Turkey is practicing, where it cannot solve issues through military expansion. It does it through economic expansion. So what we have to do is, of course, strengthen our relationship with Georgia as historical allies and 2 Christian nations in the region, and strengthen our relations with Iran, because Iran has always been there for Armenia. During the first Artsakh war, unofficially, Iran was supporting Armenians with weapons, with fighters, soldiers, which were not mercenaries. They were not paid for fighting on Armenian side. But because they understand that their interests coincide with interests of Armenia. So we, as a Reformist Party, on one side, we think that all changes, especially in a country like Armenia, that has such geographic position where any abrupt changes inside Armenia are dangerous, because we have at least 2 neighbors who are not, to put it so, are not our friends, but only waiting for the moment to attack. So all changes we want to make inside Armenia, we have to do it through reforms and in a very swift manner, without any, breaking measures whatsoever. And we have to think about building up a good cooperation with Iran, because Iran is yet another power in this region. If we look at the developments now, geopolitical developments, Iran is now improving its relations with Saudi Arabia when they had no diplomatic relations for 20 years. And today, with the mediation of Russia and China, the representative of Saudi Arabia visited Iran 2 weeks ago, which is a big event. Because before that, the collective West managed to destroy any kind of relations that were there between Iran and the Arab world. And it fell also within the interests of Turkey, because Turkey also has problems with Iran. This is probably a little information about our party. And these two big flash mobs that we organized, like I said before, but I want to put a stress here. It's an open air event when people passing by could see what we're doing. Last spring, we already had many people who moved from Russia to Armenia running away from the war. I'm not judging anyone, because war is a disaster, it's a tragedy. And fear is such a thing that you cannot handle. Of course, everyone is afraid. And these people moved from Russia to Armenia, and I was not sure how will these new guests of Armenia, how will they react when they hear, especially the second flash mob on the 9th of May, because the music there was a famous song, Katyusha. But it was, I was very pleased to see that they not only laughed and or smiled and passed by, they stopped and they looked with this sadness in their eyes that they were forced to move, to leave their country, even though probably temporarily. But still, I saw these faces and I saw that they, they had probably mixed feelings inside them, but they also were grateful to Armenians that we maintain this good tradition to celebrate the 9th of May. And it was very powerful. I was standing there and it really was very powerful, the feelings that I had. And then the video, when we showed the video, we also broadcasted the video in our office. We invited all our friends, also from other parties, also from parties who were not very much friend of ours, but they were interested to see what we're doing. And it was very well accepted, in fact. These are the two big things that we're doing, and the infopress.am, which is a portal, which is, when I say pro-Russian, sometimes people don't understand what pro-Russian means. When I say this is a pro-Russian news portal, it means that we are publishing trustworthy information, checked information, unbiased information from Russia, not from, the official channels, these are official channels. They are supposed to be biased and pro-governmental and pro-Putin. We do understand. With all respect towards President Putin, he is a great man and he's a great leader, especially looking at what happened at the 24th and when we all froze from fear here, because we in Armenia realized that if anything like this happens in Russia, or even an attempt of coup d'etat, we in Armenia, we will be doomed. Like immediately, Azerbaijan and Turkey will attack from two sides, and there will be nothing left of Armenia within, 24 hours. If something like a coup d'etat happens in Russia. So we were all frozen waiting for the developments. It proved once again that President Putin is a great leader. But of course, we want people in Armenia to see the real information about Russia. and to understand why is official Moscow acting like this or like that. And we explain to population of Armenia what is going on in the world regarding special military operation in Ukraine, regarding Russia's role in uniting countries which were not even considering being united before. For example, recently I heard that Egypt joined BRICS along with many Latin American countries, which is a great achievement because, as we know, the grain deal is coming to its end today, and Egypt is one of the biggest grain growers and producers in the world. And the situation in Ukraine now is a disaster because they didn't do any agricultural works in autumn and in spring. So Ukraine, that was previously one of the largest exporters of grain, now has no grain left. So when this grain deal is over, there will be a big problem with grain all over the world. And the fact that Egypt, as a grain producer and exporter, joined BRICS, which is obviously it's a pro-Russian organization, yes? It's a very important issue. And people in Armenia who do not follow this international development, they don't know. And we want them to know and to understand how things work in the world. Because even though Armenia is a small country, but in the South Caucasus, it's in the middle of all corridors. And this is why we're always under, under such a big pressure. Because the road from Turkey to Middle Asian stance goes through Armenia. And this is why this explains the position of Turkey in terms of their trying to push forward the Zangezur corridor issue, a corridor which they want to be an ex-territorial corridor, in the territory of Armenia. They don't want us to control it. They don't want Russians to control it. They don't want an international organization to control it. They want NATO to control a transportation corridor on the territory of Armenia, which is obviously not possible. But Washington is pushing it forward. So we want people in the world to know it, that interests of Russia are being violated here in the South Caucasus. And the only goal that the collective West is trying to achieve here is not to provide safety of people of Nagorno-Karabakh, not to provide sovereignty of Armenia or safety of Armenians, but to achieve one specific goal, to push Russia out of this region. Unfortunately, our infopress.am is a very small portal because we are doing it with our limited resources, but still, it's a job that we're doing and trying to expand. We are regularly having meetings with different people, sometimes with people, even particularly with people who do not share our pro-Russian position, because we want to make our position clear to them. And we want to explain that the Western media that they're following are not always telling them the truth. They're not always telling them the truth in the context of historical events, because it is a very popular point of view among the Western-oriented groups in Armenia that Russia betrayed Armenia several times in the course of its history, which is not truth at all. But with historical facts, the thing is that you can interpret them in many different ways, especially if you do not read history books, the right history books. The right, I mean, unbiased history books. And you only read Western articles in Western promoted media, you get a biased approach. And you do not even notice how you become an anti-Russian. And so this is yet another direction that our party is working on, to break this anti-Russian, opinions which are being cultivated through media financed from the West.
Well, Natalya, I want to thank you very much for your insight, for your analysis, and for your bravery and persistence and really fighting against some very powerful forces and doing it in a way in the grassroots that is trying to educate people. So thank you so much for taking your time to come on the show tonight. We'll do it again to keep up with the events that are happening now and unfolding in Armenia. Very, very important, not only for Armenia and for Russia, but for the rest of the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak, because it's a rare chance. Even here in Armenia, we are being invited for interviews very rarely, because the position we have is not popular. And we're not populists. We're not giving promises which are unrealistic. We're saying, no, we are in deep trouble. And it's not going to get better if we keep things like this. So this is another chance. And thank you very much for giving me this chance to raise my voice and speak up for Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh.
Well, after 2 visits to Armenia, we have fallen in love with your country. We've learned so much about your ancient history, your history throughout the ages, and modern history. It's been a real education for us, and we will be back again very soon.
Yes, please do.
Так было в России с далеких времен. Чем выше давление, тем крепче бетон. И если опасность державе грозит, становится Родина как монолит. В горниле победы сегодня как сталь опять закаляется Родины сталь. Россия, Россия, в этом слове огонь и сила, в этом слове победы и пламя, поднимаем России знамя. Россия, Россия, в этом слове огонь и сила, в этом слове победы и пламя, поднимаем России знамя. Пусть время нас бурным потоком несет, за нами Россия, за нами народ. Традиции святы и тысячи лет, продолжится летопись наших побед.